made notes, she said.
These are from this morning. I just been carrying them around.
Ah. Well, I'm hoping we will have no need for them. I'm hoping the conversation will be so riveting that we'll just go off script. Yeah. Oh, yes. There we go.
I'm not watching.
Not yet. The mics are live, but I don't believe we're.
It's going to be recorded and put on YouTube.
Yeah.
Just waiting on the go. Okay, we're live. Good evening, everyone, and welcome. On behalf of the Stubblefield Institute for Civil Political Communications here at Shepherd University, I'd like to welcome you to tonight's program. It's part of our American Conversation series, and this event tonight is titled Heroes and Villains, Reconciling the Legacies of Our Country's Historical Leaders. We are especially grateful to present this event in partnership with the Gilder Lehrman Center for the Study of Slavery, Resistance, and Abolition at Yale University, an institution that works to exemplify the kind of rigorous scholarship and public engagement that this series seeks to promote. At the Stubblefield Institute, we believe that the most pressing issues facing our society cannot be captured and meaningfully explored through sound bites, slogans, and political framing. Instead, they demand thoughtful dialogue, historical grounding, and a willingness to sit with its complexity. That is precisely the spirit of tonight's conversation. This conversation comes at a particularly meaningful moment. As we approach the 250th anniversary of the founding of the United States, we find ourselves not only celebrating the nation's beginnings, but also reflecting on the full scope of its history, its ideals, its contradictions, and its unfinished work. Anniversaries invite commemoration, but they also invite reconsideration. They ask us not only what we celebrate, but how and why. And in doing so, they bring into sharper focus the individuals whose actions and ideas help shape the nation we have inherited. The theme of tonight's discussion asks us to confront a central tension in American history. How do we understand leaders whose achievements helped shape the nation, but whose actions also included serious moral failings? Participation in slavery, displacement of native peoples, political exclusion, opportunism, and decisions that placed ambition or stability over justice. How do we grapple with figures who contributed to the founding of our nation and the preservation of democratic ideals, while also engaging in compromise, contradiction, and at times, profound wrongdoing? As we think about America at 250, these are not abstract questions. They shape how we tell our national story, how we educate future generations, and how we imagine the country's future. And a mature democracy does not turn away from complexity. It engages it honestly. We are fortunate tonight to be joined by an extraordinary panel of historians whose work has profoundly shaped our understanding of American history. Starting on your left, Dr. David Blight of Yale University is a Pulitzer Prize-winning scholar and renowned expert on the life of Frederick Douglass, the Civil War, and how it is portrayed in American memory. Next, we have Dr. David Head of the University of Central Florida and co-editor of the book A Republic of Scoundrels, the schemers, intriguers, and adventurers who created a new American nation. Next to him, we have Dr. Manisha Sinha of the University of Connecticut, award-winning author and leading historian on slavery, abolition, and Reconstruction. And guiding tonight's discussion is Dr. Benjamin Bankhurst of Shepherd University, an outstanding scholar and teacher of early American history. Together, they will help us explore how competing narratives of the past inform our understanding of the truth, memory, and democracy, especially at this pivotal national milestone. Thank you for being here and for engaging in this important reflection as we approach the nation's 250th birthday. And now it is my pleasure to turn things over to Dr. Benjamin Bankhurst.
All right. Well, thank you, Ashley. Everybody can hear me. Great. What we've decided to do is we'll begin our conversation by turning to each of our panelists for introductory remarks in response to a question. I do want to take the opportunity to say that audience members will have the opportunity to ask the panel questions after the recording ends, whether that be here or more likely in the foyer afterwards. So please do hold your questions for the end. And I think we're going to turn chronologically here as we move from the 18th into the 19th century. So our first question is going to be to Dr. Head. So Dr. Head, your latest book is entitled A Republic of Scoundrels, the schemers, intriguers, and adventurers who created a new American nation. The mythology of the American Revolution, as it has developed over the last 250 years, has homogenized the founding generation, stripping from their lives and actions nuance and moral ambiguity. Your work restores complexity to the revolutionaries, reminding us that they were motivated by a range of factors, both idealistic and pragmatic. Would you please talk a little about the personalities and motivations of this founding generation?
Yes, well, thank you for that introduction. And while Ashley was speaking, a line jumped out at me. We have a willingness to sit with complexity. Are you all happy with your complex neighbors? Okay. And that's really a good place to start because you know your lives are complex and multidimensional. You know, everyone else in here has lives that are complex and multidimensional. And of course, when we reflect on it for a moment, everyone we study in the past has a life that is complex and multidimensional. And I think that's, for any era, that's a key part of restoring the humanities to historical study, that we are looking at real people who really lived and had these lives that go in any number of directions. And of course, they have many different personalities. And something I think especially students have the trouble is understanding that their lives, they change over time in their lives, right? Mm. So if you're going to analyze their statements, or you have those readers in school where they have snippets of primary sources, that style. What that often neglects or covers over is that, well, something from 1775 is not the same as from 1795. The same person, of course, but has changed over 20 years. Of course, 18-year-olds don't really understand this because they can only remember the past 10 years, and just doesn't have that same sense. But many of you, right, who've lived much longer than that, you're not the person you were when you were 15, but you are, but you're not, right? So how does that complexity, how does that fit together, right? That's often the really just rewarding for me, the really rewarding drama of learning about other people's lives. Now, one of the challenges if you want to learn about the founders' lives is that they're already so well covered. So any work about the founders, you have to answer the first question is, what's new? What's new and different? And the publisher won't buy the explanation, well, I'm going to write about it, not somebody else. Right? Sign me to a contract. I'm going to do it this time. Need something better than that. Well, I think that looking at kind of the underside of that founding period was a really promising avenue. Not the same founders over and over again, but a broader picture. And as we got into this research, kept finding again and again how often people were doing things they were not supposed to be doing, according to the conventional wisdom or the political culture of the time. Things like not being especially virtuous or self-sacrificing or putting the country first. For many people, the aftermath of the American Revolution was not about living virtuously and free from British corruption. It was about getting rich yourself, okay? Having more land than any nobleman in Britain could ever have, okay? To be on top in society in a way that ordinary people wouldn't have been able to do previously. They were not going to simply stand aside for their betters to lead. Even without a noble title, right? They didn't want this natural aristocracy to reign. This is our time because the American Revolution set us free. Now, the complexity to their stories comes when you consider that even selfish actions can lead to the building of communities. Right? So a wonderful example of this is a man named William Blount in Tennessee. He's one of the first governors of the territory, and he was incredibly vast land holdings that he acquired by defrauding American Revolutionary War veterans. Straight out defrauding them, stealing their land bounties. In the correspondence, you can see where he will tell his brother who's in the scheme with him, okay, find somebody who will perjure themselves. Like, we'll find somebody to lie and get us the land that we want. He wanted to be a government official in Tennessee in order to be able to facilitate making treaties with the Native Americans to be able to take their land away from them, to add it to his, just in vast amounts of land in Tennessee.
He could get a cabinet position.
Yeah. Well, the communication is difficult enough that he can keep federal officials oh yeah, we're doing this great. It's all under control. Anyway, but he's one of the founders of the state, right? And the state owes its status as a state. He becomes the first U.S. senator from the state of Tennessee, and also the first senator to face impeachment proceedings for a separate scheme with the British over land kind of thing. So I love that story because it's the duality. It's both building for himself, but also building a larger community. Another figure that I'd like to talk about is General James Wilkinson. Wilkinson was a general during the American Revolution at the age of 21. Okay? Can you imagine that? General at the age of 21. And he rose to become the highest ranking general in the early republic. He was also a spy for Spain, agent number 13, okay? Passing the Spanish information. A general in the army doing this. But he was also pretty good at his job. That didn't involve keeping secrets, but the other parts of his job. He was stationed out in Louisiana, and the diplomacy and being able to make decisions on his own. He was trusted by multiple presidents, and he would put down rebellions and that kind of thing. So someone who was effective as a general in some ways, but also enriching himself. He was a merchant. He was again influential in founding Frankfurt in Kentucky. So putting those things together. He was never discovered. His spying was never discovered until after his death. So he was good at spying too. Right. How do you put those things together? He's good at some parts of his job, but is pursuing himself in the other. And I think that duality, how those personalities come together, is a wonderful part of understanding that founding generation.
Yes, and of course I hope that over the course of our conversation, we will also expand our definition of founder, right, and thinking to that generation. Now, moving into the 19th century, I would like to now turn to Dr. Blight to tell us, who of course has written extensively on the historical memory of the Civil War. Could you please tell us a bit more about contested memory within that context, specifically perhaps with some of the key figures like Abraham Lincoln or Frederick Douglass?
We can find some scoundrels here. Ashley, congratulations. Great event you put on here. Our group from Yale, I'm thrilled to be on this campus. I just want to say that I feel extraordinarily welcomed. Bush had written a book called Republic of Skunk.
Yeah, there we go.
We could do with that.
We could do volume 2 to the Civil War era. There we go.
Let's talk.
Okay.
Well, in the wake of the American Civil War, to put it, I guess, simply, the country was, of course, destroyed, much of it. Not only treasure and the death of over 700,000 soldiers, untold numbers of civilians. The imaginations and memories of Americans were also, in some ways, worse than disoriented, in some cases obliterated. Their visions of hope, their ideas of progress, their ideas of the future have been challenged as never before by this all-out war. And this ghastly scale of death and destruction. The very idea of death went through a transformation because of the Civil War. Now, at the level of leadership, which Benjamin asked about, I mean, well, first of all, Lincoln doesn't live to be a player in the memory struggle, although he certainly laid down some immortal words and thoughts about the possibilities of where memory could go from the House Divided speech to the Gettysburg Address to the second inaugural. He was already challenging the country, in a sense, to reconcile with that last paragraph of the second inaugural, charity for all, bind up the nation's wounds, and so on. But I'm always telling students and anyone else who would listen, before you read that last paragraph, in fact, instead of reading that last paragraph, read the long paragraph before that where Lincoln promises retribution. Where Lincoln says the Almighty has his own purposes, where Lincoln says somehow, the greatest use of somehow in American language, somehow all knew the war was about slavery. The second long paragraph of the second inaugural is setting up some of our enormous dilemmas this society had about memory. Frederick Douglass was in the middle prime of his life when the Civil War happened. He's in his 40s. He's about 45 at the time of emancipation. He's going to live another 30 years to 1895. He's going to live to see, experience, interpret, comment upon, like few others, the entire trajectory of 19th century American history. Born in 1818, dies 1895. He lived this story of the destruction of the United States as it had been founded, and then its rebirth, its remaking. Douglass is going to live 30 years to take Lincoln's metaphor of rebirth from the Gettysburg Address and take it down the road in 1,000 ways to try to get the country to remember what the war had really been about. Now, he's going to encounter the whirlwind of the bitterness, the terror, the horror, and the sense of loss that will become the lost cause tradition. And in that lost cause, that Confederate lost cause tradition, Douglass and many others like him will confront what happens to really all cultures that lose major wars, big wars. They have to develop to some extent, somehow, some way, an explanation. A justification for why they fought and an explanation for why they lost. And eventually, what if Frederick Douglass or many others like him who want to hold on to a kind of emancipationist memory of the Civil War, a Union victory memory of the Civil War, are not up against just a story of loss. They're up against a story of victory. And this is where we can find some scoundrels if you wanted me to, although I'll pass it back to you, Benjamin, because at its heart, the lost cause tradition became a victory narrative. And it was a victory narrative by at least the 1890s, a victory over Reconstruction. That experiment in racial democracy, that great effort to remake the United States, and it was remade in the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments. You live in the country of the 14th Amendment. You don't really live in the country of the 1789 Constitution anymore.
Great.
It's not unpatriotic to say that. It's relatively factual. And we've got some Reconstruction historians here who might back me up. Although I'm not setting you up, Manisha, don't worry. You know, and all memory, Benjamin, is especially big events, transforming events. Name any one. All memory is a struggle to control the narrative, the story. Who gets to write it? Who gets to create it? Who gets to form it? Who gets to create the rituals by which it's performed? Who gets to write the books? Who gets to win the elections? By what narrative? What story? What story of that event that shaped us all and is now shaping the next generation and the next generation? We can see that throughout our history. Memory is always a struggle for the story and for the power to control the social order upon which we base the past, versions of history, versions of memory. And we never agree on it. That's why whatever version you come to take about historical memory, there are going to be some scoundrels because it's those other people who are wrong, right?
Yeah. It reminds me of your words about Douglas, who just trying to cope with this towards the end of his life and the meaning of the war. It reminds me of his oration speech in 1881 at Storer College for the group, where he lists the scoundrels, right? These are the people who have lost. We have not lost. But I think
I love that speech, by the way. I pointed it out to a few people. Well, pointed the speech out. I just mentioned that on this grass right here at that commencement at Storer College, Douglas delivered an amazing speech.
Yeah.
It was in that speech when he actually tangled with Alexander Crummell, another great black leader, a great black thinker who challenged him, because Douglas was making the case that to the graduates of Storer College, the black graduates of Storer, born of the Civil War, many of them former slaves, grown up with they're children of Reconstruction. He's telling them, you are the creatures, you are the people of this history. Own it, control it, develop it, teach it. Alexander Crummell, a brilliant man, a great theologian, challenged Douglas that day and said, now wait a minute, black people have too much memory. But black people have a burden, and he's not wrong. Black people have a burden of memory of slavery, and we should help them, especially the young people, we should help them carry that burden more easily by trying to put some of it to rest, by not looking back.
Right.
And there was a newspaper reporter covering it who said something like, Frederick Douglass most forcefully objected. And I always thought, damn, I wish I'd have been there to hear that objection.
And of course, your points also set us up for Reconstruction. And now we turn to Dr. Sinha, who's published extensively on this topic. In your book, The Rise and Fall of the Second American Republic, Reconstruction 1860 to 1920, I was wondering if you could tell us what you mean by the Second American Republic, and what role the story of a second founding might play in the American 250th anniversary celebrations or commemorations that we're experiencing now.
Yes, so I wrote this book on the Civil War and Reconstruction, and I called it A Moment of the Founding of the Second American Republic. Following a little bit the history of French republicanism. Now, the French have had 5 republics and 5 constitutions. And their history of republicanism is as old as that of the United States. The United States has remade its republic through constitutional amendments and federal law. And I think most Americans don't think of it that way. They think of 250, go back to the founding moment, and it just all progressed in a linear, progressive way. People who were excluded were gradually included in that history. So I use the term Second American Republic to remind people that with the Civil War, the First Republic actually fell, right? The Deep South states seceded when Lincoln was elected to the presidency because they refused to accept the results of the presidential election. And they were later joined by Upper South states to form the Confederacy. So it was important for me to tell this history of contestation, of different visions of the Republic. And Reconstruction, in a way, is that moment. And it's not just historians who are saying this. Abolitionists call the Civil War our second American Revolution. And they were right, because the Constitution is remade, the first federal civil rights laws are passed, the first federal hate crime laws against domestic racist terrorist groups like the Ku Klux Klan and other assorted groups are passed. So this is a moment when our modern interracial democracy is being born. And it's important to remember that moment. And the backlash against it. So that's why it's the rise and fall. Because eventually, of course, that republic fell, and we had an era of Jim Crow, disfranchisement, and tremendous racial violence in the South. So it's not until the Civil Rights Movement, that you have, in a way, the promise of the Second American Republic being fulfilled. And modern ideas, or what I call the Third American Republic. So that's the reason why I was using that typology. I just curated an exhibition, 250th exhibition, on the Second American Republic at the Abraham Lincoln Presidential Library and Museum in Springfield, Illinois. If you ever go there, go see it. It goes on until January 2027. And I tried to tell this story because the book, of course, has many, many parts to the story. But the exhibition tries to remind Americans that we have had a second founding and that we are still contesting today ideas of the 14th Amendment, national citizenship by birthright or naturalization. We are still contesting today those ideas behind those initial federal civil rights laws. And I'm not talking about the 1960s, I'm talking about the 1860s and the 1870s. So for me, it was really important to write this book, to show that second founding. And I think on the 250th founding of the American Republic, it is important for us to go back and see the ways in which Americans have reimagined their republic and expanded the boundaries of our democracy in the past.
Just to continue off that point, are we too much in the thrall then of this linear narrative going back to the Revolution? To what extent can your work kind of complicate or break us free, I guess, of the kind of the tyranny of that founding moment, if we're to be set in stone there, which seems to be the impetus, right? So.
Yeah, well, it's not as if I'm saying that the founding moment is not important.
Right.
It is important. And, as Lincoln himself sort of really evoked the legacy of the Declaration of Independence.
Right.
He says, we began with saying all men are created free and equal. Now we say all men are created free but not black people. And now we say, oh, not Catholics. Oh, not immigrants. He says, when it comes to that, I'd rather go to Russia than live under the regime of what he called the base alloy of democracy.
Right.
So they are actually very aware of the founding moment, and they're indeed evoking those ideals. For instance, we know the first 8 to 10 amendments, people say 8, but I would say certainly the first 9 amendments, as the Bill of Rights, right? We all call it the Bill of Rights today. Well, who called it the Bill of It was John Bingham, one of the main authors of the 14th Amendment, who called it the Bill of Rights. It was not called the Bill of Rights before the 1860s. He called it the Bill of Rights. So I'm not saying that we need to take away from that founding moment. I don't see a lot of the best rules. The ones I study, they're complex figures. I think as Ashley, thank you for your introduction, and put it, these are complex, nuanced stories. And I think the tendency to either have that progressive, linear, mythic notion of American history, but then to do a complete 360 and say, oh, it was all about racism, reaction, and oppression, is as simple as the narrative it seeks to replace. And that's why in the book I call it the great contest.
Right.
There's always been contestation in American history about these ideas. Antebellum Americans didn't even think the Constitution was written in stone. They argued about it. African Americans said the Bill of Rights ideas are applicable to us. We make claims for citizenship. So I think it's really important for us to think about this sort of Second American Republic as a reimagining of the American Republic, but also trying to retain what was best about the founding of the Republic itself.
Great, excellent. All right, so we've had our kind of introductory remarks. I now want to try to encourage a more sort of fluid conversation here with some perhaps some big questions. So all three of you have challenged us to re-examine the lives and legacies of some of our prominent figures and groups in American history. Perhaps we can start with that question that I asked or I alluded to when we turned to you, Dr. Head, regarding who and who is not a founder. And perhaps we can think about this within the context of the many foundings of the 18th and 19th century. So can I turn to the panel and ask who's been left out that perhaps you'd like to see integrated into our tellings of 1776 or 1865 or vice versa? So does anybody want to talk more about forgotten founders, in other words?
Well, I'll just name a few who would have probably, if they were here, they would jump up and say, hey, how about us? Well, the leaders of the women's suffrage movement, they were complicated. Talk about complications. Elizabeth Cady Stanton, one of the prime movers of the Seneca Falls Convention of 1848, devoted her life to the women's rights and suffrage movement. And stopped, basically, she and Susan Anthony and many others, stopped advocating for women's suffrage in the midst of the Civil War. They accepted the fact that this was a gigantic struggle over slavery. It was the black man's hour, as even they said. But when it was over, they wanted their place in that 15th Amendment. And to put it mildly, were royally whacked off that they were not included, women were not included in that 15th Amendment. Now, in Cady Stanton, this is classic hero-villain issues here, scoundrels maybe. Elizabeth Cady Stanton had a deep racism in her bones, to say the least, and all of the major Stanton scholars now have faced this, have argued this, have shown this. When women weren't in the 15th Amendment, she went on the attack. And she attacked black men in particular with racist rhetoric, including Douglas himself. If a black man with no education, well, she didn't say black man, if an N-word with no education and this and that and this and that can go vote, why can't a sophisticated lady like Lucy Stone, or she would point to other suffragists? And then, of course, founders, that very complicated problem. There are real founders, the people who actually wrote the Declaration.
Right.
The 5 guys on that committee who wrote the Declaration of Independence have a right to claim something there. And Mr. Jefferson did, for sure, even though he got roundly edited on that. About 1/4 of his draft got edited, and he didn't like it. But And God knows Adams and Hamilton and Washington and others they created an extraordinary thing, the American experiment. But along the way in the 19th century, a group of people who, once we get to emancipation in the second founding, as Manisha is expressing it, for 35 years, black leaders from a dozen states or more in the North have been going to black conventions. They've been going to black conventions since really 1830, although there were forms of them even in the 1820s. Year in and year out, state conventions, national conventions, always arguing for their place in the Declaration of Independence, arguing for their citizenship rights before there even was a definition of national citizenship. Those black conventions are extraordinary if you're and the minutes or reports of those conventions are now all online. They've all been digitized. It's quite a sight. It's an amazing sight. I mean, they would, by the time you get to that second founding, a lot of them would be putting their hands up and say, hey, now wait a minute here. If we're going to rewrite this narrative, what about us? And all along the way, this is a handoff to Manisha. I mean, there are a lot of abolitionists, white and black, who would have said, you know, we've been trying to remake this republic since we founded our first organization in 1821 or 1831 or 1841. We've been trying to remake this country. We've been trying to destroy its greatest social evil and try to imagine a real democratic republic, an expanded democratic republic. And they, of course, had all their schisms and fights with each other, too. All social movements fight with themselves. It's sort of like faculties in universities. Call a meeting, there will be a disagreement. It just is. But so, you know, there were plenty of other people, and Native Americans. I mean, the Cherokee are writing their own constitution and demanding that they belong in the Declaration of Independence. Thank you very much. They're going to court. They lose in the Supreme Court, and that's partly why Indian removal happened when it did. But they're going to claim, hey, it's not just land rights here and sovereignty. We really care about that. But we're part of this story, too. You know, that we like that Declaration of Independence. Those are some good principles. And we could go on with this. And you get other immigrant groups, but, you know, the Irish weren't exactly welcomed into citizenship, nor were Mexican Americans just welcomed into citizenship. And at this moment, still aren't any of them. But so lots of people could have claimed a role as founder, but there we got to break that word out of its 18th century context, and sometimes we do that perhaps a little loosely, and sometimes we can do it in meaningful ways. It's all in how we do that. Actually, Frederick Douglass considered himself a founder of the Second American Republic. He would have said, "Thank you very much. I am. I never held office." But, you know, I've been talking about this since I was 23 years old, so now you're listening.
Dr. Head, I was at a conference recently, and the panelists were talking about Dunmore's proclamation in the midst of the American Revolution, and we were very effusive of Dunmore. At one point, though, somebody stood up and said, wait, are we saying that the heroes of the American Revolution are the effing British Army? Is that where we are? So I'm wondering if you might, do you have any thoughts on how we might, these scoundrels and the tension between idealism and pragmatism in the American Revolution?
Right, that's a good moment. You stop and say, wait, what are we talking about here? The British are the bad guys. How do they get to be the good guys?
Right.
And how did all that come together? You know, while David was talking, I was just thinking about why being a founder is so. Why do we have that connection to that term, right? You think today they're like tech founders, right? That's an aspiration some students have. I'm sure you're Yale students, right? They want to be founder of a company and entrepreneurs, and like why is that?
Some of them are poets.
Yeah, so but why is that so culturally alive? Okay? Being the founder, being first. And then you think about the origins, right? So that's a popular narrative technique, right? If you're going to see especially like movie franchises or whatever. That you can go back to the origin story of whatever character. Right? Why is that so powerful? Part of it, of course, is I think there's probably a human urge, like being first is significant. Okay? But there's something more to it. I think part of the idea, if you think about the movie genre, right, the way it's like if you can figure out what the origins are, then you can understand the character later. If you understand how something started, then you can understand everything else that came after it, right? I think that's part of the urge of the United States too. We understood what kind of pure founding we had, these principles, and then the analysis, well, how do we decline from that? Or as Manisha mentioned, you can flip that around very easily and say, well, how do we start out so terrible, right? And it's been bad ever since, except for ways we might be able to fix it. If you reflect on your own lives, that's not the way your lives work, right? Yes, you have whatever issues you had growing up or coming along, it's usually not where you started, but the decisions you make along the way after that. I've looked to some psychologists, try to counsel people, until people are kind of obsessed, like, why is my family like this? Why did my parents do this the way? Why didn't my mom give me this, whatever it was? And the answer there is, you'll never know, and it doesn't matter now. The only way forward is to move beyond that. And I don't know if that's such a great historical principle.
Maybe not.
Right. I'm talking us out of talking us out of jobs here.
Yeah, right.
But it is something I thought about. That's really interesting. You talk about the one person who's arguing, about forgetting. Forgetting is important.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know. That's worth considering. I wonder what circumstances are forgetting a good thing. Is forgetting a good thing?
Mm-hmm.
Under what circumstances is an agreement we are never going to understand what exactly these men intended when they wrote the Constitution?
Mm-hmm.
Okay? And what does that? How do we move forward from there?
I would just add to that and say, when we think about the founders, we think of, the Virginia dynasty, Washington, Jefferson, Madison, and for those of you who knew early Republic, on to Monroe. Or you think of, the committee that wrote the Declaration of Independence, mainly Franklin, Adams, and Jefferson, or you think about the Constitutional Convention. And I think it's really important for us to understand, and I sort of understood this a little bit when I wrote my earlier book on abolition, on the history of abolition from the American Revolution to the Civil War, is that there were multiple founders of the American Republic. When I used to teach at the University of Massachusetts, and I taught there for 20 years, now I'm dating myself, David, my students would always be astonished when I'd ask them to think about how did Massachusetts abolish slavery, right? It was not a gift handed down to black people. Enslaved people started suing for their freedom in the courts, and the Puritans had a tradition where they allowed them to do that. People had freedom suits. Long before Dred Scott, you had black people suing for their freedom, and that's how Massachusetts basically decides that slavery is no longer compatible with its new state constitution. So are these people founders? The African American enslaved people in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts who petitioned for their freedom, who sued for their freedom, and brought about abolition. A lot like those enslaved people who ran into Union Army lines and created those slave refugee camps, contraband camps that existed right here at Harper's Ferry, right? The Freedmen's School that became Storer College. So there's a long history. And a lot of people say, oh, these were men of their times. Well, they were abolitionists in the 18th century. They were abolitionist societies.
Right.
And some of these men, like Benjamin Franklin, became president of the Pennsylvania Abolition Society and completely excoriated Southern slaveholders. So even our founders are a little more complex than we understand. And Benjamin Franklin had owned an enslaved man, whom he freed, but had owned him. Similarly, I was doing a tour in Philadelphia for the 250th. All the sites, Liberty Bell, President's House. And there's a controversy about the President's House because it depicted the enslaved people of George Washington. And I think Washington is one person, unlike even Jefferson and Madison, who never freed their enslaved people, for Jefferson just his progeny. But Washington is so interesting because as President of the United States, he is pursuing an enslaved woman, mainly on Martha's urging, I think. She flees slavery, she goes, and he's the president in Philadelphia, and she's in New Hampshire. And the postmaster of New Hampshire tells the President of the United States, the founding father, saying, "Nah, New Hampshire is a free state. We're not going to send her back to you." And Washington is so embarrassed about it. He doesn't actually do this publicly. He does this privately. So here's the contradictions that you can see. But it's also true that Washington, on his death, freed the enslaved people he had control over. The only stipulation was that they'd be free only after Martha died. Now, Martha Washington was so nervous that they would poison her to gain their freedom, that she freed them immediately. Now, isn't that story more interesting than some sort of, the actual history is actually far more complex and far more interesting. And when I was looking at Washington, and there was all this thing, oh, Washington the enslaver, he pursued on a judge, etc. But then I came across this eulogy on Washington by a black abolitionist minister, Richard Allen, to whose church Washington had contributed, one of the first black churches, the African Methodist Episcopal Church. It was the church that was attacked in Charleston in 2015. It's a very old historic denomination. And in his eulogy, Richard Allen says that in his death, Washington removed the last stain for which any person could blame him for. And he says, I hope that this country that reveres him as the father of the country would follow him. Of course, most Southern enslavers did not follow him, right? So the story is actually far more complex than just Washington sort of made virtually into a demigod, as a founder, versus also Washington as simply the enslaver. He's actually far more interesting. And the same thing can be said for Lincoln, right? Lincoln's not an abolitionist. He's not born with the emancipation, the pen. We got the emancipation pen. It's on display at the Lincoln Museum. I made sure that we got that from the Massachusetts Historical Society. They didn't want to send it, but they sent a Boston state trooper to Logan Airport, and it was in a thing, and you don't want to know how much it's been insured for. And it's in a bulletproof glass at the Presidential Library. Anyway, so Lincoln's also interesting. I think Lincoln's greatness lay not because he was an abolitionist, because he wasn't. He was a moderate anti-slavery politician who was always balancing his loyalty to the Union and the Constitution with his anti-slavery beliefs. But during the Civil War, he moves towards abolition. And just before his death, he becomes the first American president to endorse black citizenship, which is the cornerstone of Reconstruction. And that's why in my book I call him our first Reconstruction president, because he actually made that speech. So I think his greatness lies in the ability to evolve from that moderate anti-slavery position and to starting the Civil War, saying, I don't want this to become a remorseless revolutionary struggle. And then when it does become that, as David pointed out in his second inaugural, saying something like, until every drop of blood drawn by the lash is played by a drop of blood in the battlefield. It sounds like John Brown. We're in John Brown country. I think that's the kind of complexity and nuance that that makes American history so exciting and so good to know and to know about the founding period in those complex ways. And I'm really against the simple narratives that don't give us that complex, because the actual history is far more interesting.
Yes, it's interesting when these figures lose control of that narrative, right? Dr. Blight.
Well, I just wanted to put an underline under that word contradiction, which has come up here several times. It's in some ways a surface idea. We all know people are complicated and contradictory, but let's think a second. Of course we are. We wouldn't have any literature if it weren't for our contradictions. Think of the last novel you read. There's got to be a conflict in it. Think of music. What makes music move? I don't claim to know music that well, but what makes music work and move and grab us and move us? It's collisions and contradictions and, you know, Beethoven going nuts because he couldn't quite hear it and so on. We wouldn't have any art without contradictions. We wouldn't have any. We wouldn't have any conflict in court. We wouldn't have the process of law without contradiction. It is so human. It is what we are, and this sense that, again, I know if you're teaching fourth graders or third grade, I mean, children need heroes. We all need heroes. I'm still looking for another hero. My heroes are all dead. Maybe they always were, but you know, children need heroes. God knows that. I remember the time when I finally got a chance to ask Al Kaline, my childhood baseball hero. If you don't know about Al Kaline, you have a problem.
Detroit Tigers.
The greatest right fielder the Detroit Tigers ever had, and almost as great as Roberto Clemente. But I was in a Detroit airport once, and dropping my mother off to take a flight, and there came the Tigers down the concourse. This is before security and all. There they were. Al was at the end of his career, and I walked up to him, and Mr. Kaline. I mean, I'm like 28 years old by then, and you know, I didn't have a pen. I had an old envelope or something. Mr. Kaline, he had a pen. He was ready. He pulled it out, but Al was smoking. I thought, no, he smokes. Damn. Come on, Al, you can't do that. But you know, don't get too close to your heroes is a real thing. They're gonna, you know, in the contradiction, and when you do biography, it's our lifeblood. In some ways, we look for those human moments where they contradict themselves. They change their minds. Imagine that, or they screw up. You know, or they really do something bad to somebody, really bad sometimes. That's what makes them human. That's what makes the story move. So here, this is why I like this topic, heroes and villains, because history's not melodrama, despite how we always want to make it that way. There's a human urge. I don't know if we're born. I don't know if we're hardwired with it, because I'm not a neuroscientist. But we kind of love melodrama, most of us, not all. Some of us are just plain dark, and we like tragedy. Don't give me, you know, they're only villains, you know. No, but we love melodrama. A story that has a hero and a villain, a story with a start and a middle and a finish. That's what the movies do for us. Not all movies, but that's not what history is. And this country is once again having to learn that big time, under tremendous political crisis and pressure, that history is not an escalator up and is not an escalator down. It's a messy, crazy, complicated, human conflicted story. And if you don't look at the conflicts, you won't even grasp history. So, you know, it's time to start with the youngest of children to help them understand they are already contradicting themselves. They're already in trouble, of course. Kids are, by definition, in trouble. But there's a reason why they always say, I didn't do it, I didn't do it, I didn't do it. It's because they don't want to be that person who did it. In melodrama, it's all supposed to work out fine. You've all heard that phrase. America was born perfect and then launched its career of improvement. I don't know who said, I used to think that was Richard Hofstadter, but somebody told me that's not Hofstadter. Yeah. I don't know who said that first. But there's an urge in America, maybe in the air, in the water, and somewhere, we get this, that we just insist that the history of this place is always about progress. It'll all come back together. It's like the old tackling dummy, you know, you hit it enough times one way or the other, it always comes back to the middle. No, it doesn't.
Yeah.
Sometimes it really falls apart. Ask the Russians. Ask the Germans.
Yeah. Yeah, I would, reiterate, we tend to think of heroes and villains in fiction, right? And history is actually stranger than fiction because it is, far more complex in that way. I, have always, again, as a historian of abolition, if I was to look at heroes, I would look at those ordinary American citizens, black and white men and women, who, through successive waves of abolitionism, managed to enact what the great W.E.B. Du Bois called, and he was here at Storer College too, at the Niagara Movement, abolition democracy. That's what he called Reconstruction. And I think we sometimes forget that our heroes can come in many different shapes and forms, and that they are also part of that broader democratic story. And Lincoln himself, when they sort of praised him, oh, you're the great emancipator, and he says, don't praise me. And he actually named William Lloyd Garrison. He said, think of Garrison. When people were stoning him and wanting to tie a noose around his neck, he was fighting not only for the immediate end of slavery, but for equal citizenship for African Americans, right? That is the dual goal of the abolition movement. So I think we really need to think of not heroes, but heroic, there have been heroic figures, right? Complicated with their own, they're human beings. So obviously there are flaws, there are times when they have taken the wrong decision. But I think we do ourselves a disservice when we don't think of these acts of citizenship in the past that has improved our life. And there were villains too, right? In my mind, the villains are the Confederacy. I'm sorry. As a Civil War historian, there is something very straight about that. There's nothing honorable about Lee's army enslaving free black people in Pennsylvania on his way back to the South. Nothing honorable about that. And I like it when I get applause. Thank you. But, so for me, there have been certain wars, the Civil War, the Second World War against fascism, and I'm a Gandhian, I'm from India originally, so obviously, but there have been certain wars that have, in my mind, been good wars. And the Civil War is one of them. But it also shows us that those villainous ideas live on and get recreated. We often forget that the overthrow of Reconstruction actually leads to really nearly 100 years when the United States loses its democracy. When you disfranchise black men in the South, ignore the 15th and the 14th Amendments, and the United States Supreme Court at that time, Plessy versus Ferguson, and many other decisions, completely eviscerates the Reconstruction Constitution, that we actually lost our democracy for that long period. And I think for American citizens to fully grasp that, is an important thing. So the South may have lost the war, but they won the peace. And that lost cause mythology that David writes about, the building, they put up statues of Confederate generals and presidents as a victorious thing. A losing side doesn't put up its statues, and they put it up exactly in the Jim Crow era, right? So I think it's important to understand that there have been villains in American history. And I'm not here to tell you, don't identify with this, or don't, someone say this is my heritage. Who are you, naturalized citizen of the United States, telling me about my granddaddy who fought for the whatever? And my idea is not to say that, it's to say, look, this is what these people stood for. Read the secession ordinances, read what Calhoun said, read the biography of Robert E. Lee, you know, and then you decide which side you're on. That's up to you. I'm not here to tell you what you decide. So yeah, we don't think of heroes and villains, but I think, as Frederick Douglass famously put it, there was a right side and there was a wrong side. And once you lose sight of that, you're in.
Right.
As long as we can hold on to one, Manisha, you know I admire everything you write and everything you do. But, now, come on, let's have a little fun. Oh, sorry. As long as, and look, I've spent a major piece of my life trying to write that lost cause into oblivion, and I've failed. But
No.
as long as we manage to keep one possible thing alive, and that is humility, the best value or bit of temperament I've always felt, and you know, this is a matter of opinion, for a historian in particular, is the sense of humility, to know that yes, we judge, and we all judge. At the end of the day, we make judgments. You make judgments doing research. But as long as we know that, you know, but for geography, but for accident of birth, but for the culture we're born in, raised in, imbued in, poisoned by, there but for the grace of God go I. It doesn't mean I'm going to write any kind of apologetics for the Confederacy. I'm tired of being asked by foreign journalists, Professor, what was that thing called the Confederacy? And why don't Americans ever get over it? And my deadline is like in an hour. Sir, give me an hour and I can tell you what the Confederacy was. But, you know, it's worth hanging on to Lincoln's greatest feature, humility. To know when he had something figured out and when he didn't have it figured out. It doesn't mean we apologize for anybody. It means that, and it doesn't mean we don't condemn people in the past, because we do.
But David, don't you think one of the biggest mistakes during Reconstruction was Johnson's blanket pardons to Confederate leaders, and then the Amnesty Act of 1872?
Absolutely, but that's a historical judgment.
Yeah.
That's a judgment we're making on actions done in the past. I completely agree.
Yeah.
Johnson did a lot of things that held back Reconstruction, delayed Reconstruction, ruined Reconstruction. Although he may have made Reconstruction a little longer because he was so obstinate to the radical Republicans. Now, I'm just trying to suggest that, you know, as soon as we are the righteous ones who can condemn those wrong in the past, we have set ourselves up for the next set of judgments.
I actually got Dr. King's letter from the Birmingham jail. There's no middle ground sometimes. And I think when it comes to...
And I don't take any middle ground right now on what the executive branch of the government is trying to do to our profession, and I will fight them in any way I have to.
And I think the tragedy of American history has been that we have not reckoned with the full extent of evil that was involved with slavery and segregation, and how we still live with its afterlives. Once you recognize that and you see a Confederate flag, you know exactly what it stands for. Once you, and I think that's a historical reckoning that every American should be aware of. The long afterlives of slavery, and we thought, oh, the Civil Rights Act is passed, the Voting Rights Act is passed. We are, you know, that kind of crude racism is not going to reemerge. That's a thing of the past. well, guess what? These things never really die out. And one of the reasons I think it hasn't is because we haven't had that reckoning. And we continue to either serve up sanitized versions of the past or where we don't want to look at the bad stuff. But if you don't look at the bad stuff, how will you appreciate the good stuff?
I'm all for calling out
You
every
know?
sanitized version of anything that happens.
Yeah, yeah.
On the spot.
Yeah.
I'm afraid I always suspected that my role as moderator would be spoiler.
Come on, Benjamin, come on back in.
Right, I'm just as enthralled with this debate as anybody else.
Ah, no, this is
but
fun.
for the sake of time,
We've argued this before.
I would like to ask our panelists one final question. And of course, a sign of a good panel is that the script is completely So I think inherent to the question I was going to ask is that perhaps there could be unity in memorializing certain figures. But I think what the panel has revealed here is that we should be suspicious of memorialization as an act of unity or as a unifying force in American politics. So I guess my question to you all would be, how do we memorialize the nuance in these figures, and how do we do that? What is the goal of memorialization this year, the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence, and so I'll just open that up to the panel.
So I've been doing an assignment in my classes over the last few years, asking students to create their own memorial, their own monument. Okay. Rather than, I used to have them argue about whether whatever the monument was should stay, or that got stale. They'll create your own new thing. Okay. And I open it up. You can do anything you want as long as it's from our course. Okay. So. You can't have World War II tanks. Yeah. You can't have the tanks of World War II in the first half of the U.S. History survey. And the results are always really interesting, what the students choose. Part of it is driven by the assignments that I used during the course and the stories that I told, right? So I show the documentary from a long time ago now, Martha Ballard, right? So you get a lot of Martha Ballard statues and things like that. But they do tend to pick, right, more ordinary people than leaders. Okay? They do try to do kind of regular moments. Okay? So this is what it was like to live on the frontier in the 1850s or something like that. I told them in the instructions specifically, I can't remember how I worded it. I told them they can do a Confederate on horseback if they want to. Okay? But they should explain why they're doing that and why it's significant and how it's going to work and all that kind of thing. So far, nobody has taken up that offer. Okay?
Progress.
Right, no, nobody has done that. But it's really interesting to see what attracts students. It's more the kind of everyday objects, the everyday stories, the great leaders. Right, that's not what they're gravitating towards. Again, partly because of the way I structure the course and the materials I give them, to work with. I balance, the big figures, right, with also everyday life. So they have a lot to choose from. But it's really interesting what's resonating with students here, and they connect with what life was like for ordinary people like them, much more than the big leaders. It's really interesting.
So the mundanity is what attracts. Okay.
Democracy. Good for you. Go ahead.
You're talking about memorialization, and as you all know, there had been a huge controversy over Confederate generals' names and military bases, on the Confederate flag, on Confederate monuments. And my position is, look, you want to fly a Confederate flag in your own house, that's fine. But if you fly it at a courthouse or a state house, or if you have a monument in government property where everyone's taxes is being used to support the maintenance of that statue, that's not a legitimate monument that should be there. And I think it is really problematic to have that. And I knew that these symbols carry so much in them that they cannot be sanitized, that you cannot have some sort of innocuous heritage about it. Not when Alexander Stephens, the Vice President of the Confederacy, in his cornerstone speech is saying, our new nation stands on the fact that the Declaration of Independence is wrong, that men are created unequal, and that some are meant to serve others. You can't. It's not an innocuous symbol. And I realized this when I went to Germany. My husband's German, and there you cannot fly the swastika flag, the Nazi flag. It's against the law. You can't even do Heil Hitler, as you'd be arrested if you raised your hand and did that. But we have different rules in the United States. So what do the neo-Nazis fly there? They were flying the Confederate flag. And so right then, in the 1990s, when I was doing research on my first book on South Carolina, on pro-slavery ideology and Southern constitutional theories, that was my first book. I wrote the book on abolition because I wanted to write about people I liked, actually. But when I saw that then, and I remember writing a letter to the Columbia, I think it was the Daily South Carolina, or some newspaper, saying that this is awful, that the Confederate flag, battle flag, is part of the state flag. It's flying on state grounds. And I remember I was persona non grata at the University of South Carolina. They were like, oh, they published your letter. You're like a Yankee, you know. You won the, and then, of course, it was eventually taken down after a huge tragedy. And so I think there are certain monuments, there are certain symbols of memory that are not innocuous, and that they should not be in any government, certainly nothing. I mean, these people committed treason against the American Republic. You know, as Grant said, in the worst cause possible, in defense of human bondage. I don't think, and this is not the way you preserve history. You know, this is the way you preserve these false narratives of the lost cause, etc. And so, just, you know, since you asked the question memorialization, I just wanted to take a very clear position on that as a historian, but also as a citizen of the Republic.
Well, I don't know. I think the hope, perhaps, that we could try to end on for this moment, 250th, huge anniversary of the whole country, is that, for one thing, it's making us reflect again on the nation, the whole, and not only our parts. Now, we've learned a lot in the last half century because of the great new research about our parts. Black history, women's history, Native American history has just boomed, and it continues to boom and boom more, and it should. But anniversaries like this make us think about the nation, or it should. Now, it doesn't mean that it'll always happen. And a lot of the best work, the best commemorations, the best exhibitions, and so on and so forth, are going to be local. They're going to be all over the country, at the state level, at the city level, at the town level, at the County Historical Society level, right here. And in organizations that do history in their own communities as a community service. That's good news. But I am concerned that my own profession has taught us so much about our parts, and we forgot the whole at times. I don't think there's any question we did. It became almost anathema to be writing about the nation as a whole in academic history departments. Not everyone, but many of them. So commemorations are good in that sense. Also, look, we're getting a feast or a struggle, whatever we want to call it, about our civic language. The Declaration of Independence is our civic language. Everybody knows those principles. They might not even know where they came from. They may have seen it on a restaurant placemat. Life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, and there's that right of revolution. That never quite gets remembered as much as the doctrine of consent. But there it is. And by the way, if you go read your Declaration of Independence, you should carry it, pocket version. more sentences are given by Jefferson and his editors to that right of revolution, the right of a people, when the usurpations and abuses of their rights become such, they have the right to overthrow the, and these people overthrew a monarch in a world of nothing but monarchies. That was bold. Mm-hmm. You want to honor the founding fathers? Honor their courage, if nothing else. The dudes were brave. But more language is given in that Declaration of Independence to justifying the right of revolution than to anything else in it, including all the, or any one of the grievances against King George. This commemoration, whatever comes of the next couple of weeks in Washington, or the next few weeks, is causing a stir. And a number of people from our group here doing public history have helped create an effort, a movement, and an event that's going to occur September 26th, is it? 26th, called We Want More History. And it's an effort to get, correct me here, my dear friends, Alan and Kate and others, yeah, there it is. There are flyers now. It's an invitation or an appeal to every local historical society, public library, festival for this or for that, anywhere in the country, to just have a day of saying, what are we doing about American history today? What are we doing about the complexity of American history today? It's not just, Diversity Day. What about American history and how diverse it is? Let's all do some history. And then maybe it becomes more than one day. And maybe it becomes eventually a rally of 1 million people in Washington, D.C. who surround the Smithsonian and hug it. What do they do to buildings or old ballparks when cities want to tear them down? They did this in Detroit with Tiger Stadium. People went to Detroit, formed a human chain around the building and hugged it. Now, they tore it down anyway. And if you use the men's room in those buildings or the women's rooms, that was the reason they tore that place down. But anyway, let's go hug our historical institutions and let's shout to the world that this matters to us as a people. Our history belongs to us. So maybe, just maybe, people will start thinking about the nation and whether it's just about them, or just about their family, or just about their town. That's my hope for this, and I'm not generally that hopeful. So.
Well, I think that's a fantastic way to end the panel.
I'm not being hopeful?
Well, immediately before that.
Thank you, Dr. Bankhurst, and thank you to our distinguished panelists for giving a deeply thoughtful and illuminating conversation. Let's give them another round of applause.
Thank you.
As we reflect on tonight's conversation, it is fitting that it takes place at this moment as we approach the 250th anniversary. This milestone is not only a celebration of endurance and of the events that we've discussed tonight, but it's also an invitation, as Dr. Blight said, to deepen our understanding to who we have been and who we inspire to be. Tonight's discussion reminds us that history is not a fixed narrative, but an ongoing dialogue, and it's neither simple nor settled. What we've heard this evening is that it's about developing a fuller, more honest understanding of the past, one that acknowledges contradiction, confronts injustice, and still allows space for human complexity. And it allows us to move beyond the simplistic of the hero or the villain. So I'd like to extend my sincere thanks once again to our partners at the Gilder Lehrman Center, to our panelists and our moderator for sharing their insights, and to all of you for attending this important conversation. If you enjoyed tonight's program, I hope you will return for the second half of this series, which is being held June 30th at 7 p.m. right here in the Byrd Center for Congressional History and Education. That night, we will dive into a conversation on rewriting and representation and who controls how we remember our nation's past. You saw just a little bit of touching on that, and I'm sitting there going, not yet. Not yet, because we will jump right into that on June 30th. Joining us that evening will be Cheney McKnight, founder of Not Your Mama's History, Dr. Megan Kate Nelson, historian and author of The Westerners, Mythmaking and Belonging on the American Frontier, Alan Spears, Senior Director of Cultural Resources with the National Park Conservation Association. Alan's here tonight, right back here. And guiding that conversation will be Dr. Jennifer Murray, Director of Shepherd University's George Tyler Moore Center for the Study of the Civil War. More information on how to register can be found in your program and on our website. In addition to the Stubblefield Institute's program, there are many opportunities to engage in civil discourse coming up, including through the Robert C. Byrd Center for Congressional History and Education, Shepherd University's George Tyler Moore Center for the Study of the Civil War, Shepherd University's Lifelong Learning Program, and the Shepherd University Common Reading Program, which will be reading The Narrative Life of Frederick Douglass during the 2026-2027 academic year. And there is a flyer at the table out front with all of those programs listed for you. So we hope you will continue to join us as we mark this significant national milestone, not only looking back, but by participating thoughtfully in the ongoing work of democracy. So have a wonderful evening, and we invite you to take the conversation onward and out to the reception, which is in the lobby. Thank you very much.